A middle-aged man opens the peephole in his door before stepping out of his apartment. He lives in the London of the future, where social housing has been completely abolished. Those who can't afford to buy something decent are forced to dwell in slums. Izzy lives in a residential area called The Kitchen. Today starts as usual, with the local radio news and the voice of its host, Lord, announcing that water has been cut off in the western wing. Those who want to wash should hurry to the eastern part, but only if it's absolutely necessary. For Izzy, it is necessary. He heads through the still sleeping floors to claim the communal shower for a long time, indifferent to the long lines in the corridor and the anger of his neighbors. Meanwhile, outside, a group of young people on bikes, rebels opposing the current order, chase a grocery van. Izzy emerges from the shower to the outraged shouts of his neighbors. Returning to his apartment, he rereads his messages. The latest one is a notification from a developer, informing him that his single-room apartment in a prestigious residential complex is nearly ready. He must make the payment, or in 21 days, it will be sold to someone else. Outside, the group of young people distribute the food taken from the van, urging people to take it only if they truly need it, emphasizing the importance of mutual care in a society abandoned by the government. Izzy mounts his motorcycle and heads to work at a futuristic funeral service called Life After Life, where families who can't afford traditional burials can turn their loved ones into trees. The family can visit the sapling until it's time to plant it somewhere. After that, the trace of the deceased is lost, and no one can know where their loved one has taken root. This time, Izzy has to convince an elderly man, also living in the kitchen. The old man is outraged at the idea of becoming a tree, but Izzy reminds him that his family would undoubtedly prefer an expensive coffin and lavish funeral. He urges the man to consider the cost of such a burial. If his family can't afford it, the man must think of them and spare them from crippling debt. The man is moved, agrees with Izzy's reasoning, and goes off to pick a nice-looking pot for himself. Later, Izzy's colleague Jace marvels at his ability to persuade anyone to do anything. Izzy explains that he's saving up for his own apartment, describing the complex as a horrible dump, much to Jace's confusion. Izzy is confident that the kitchen will soon be cleared out. Later, while performing his duties, Izzy unexpectedly sees a photograph and hears the name of a woman currently being prepared for burial. He heads to the chapel, where he listens to kind words about the deceased and watches her son Benji being invited to give a final speech. The boy fidgets, struggling for words, and accidentally spots Izzy standing by the door. The boy, seemingly shaken by his loss, remains silent. The woman is processed, and when Benji looks back, Izzy is already gone. After some time, Benji carries a pot with a sprouting seedling to place it in the communal nursery. Izzy watches him from a distance. At the end of the workday, as Izzy steps outside, the boy calls out to him. He remembers seeing the man at the funeral and wants to know why he was there. Did he know his mom? Izzy tries to shake off the persistent teenager, but the boy admits he had hoped to meet his father. Izzy apologizes, explaining that he is not his father, and prepares to leave. The man mounts his bike, which immediately catches Benji's admiration. The boy asks if he can take it for a spin and tries to prolong their conversation. However, Izzy cuts it short and rides off. Benji remains by the office entrance, eventually sitting dejectedly on the curb. A few minutes later, Izzy unexpectedly returns and offers Benji a ride home. The boy eagerly hops on behind him. They soon arrive at a house where Benji and his mother lived until recently. Izzy confesses he lives in the kitchen, mentioning that the conditions there are even worse than people say. Benji reveals his mother had told him his father lives in the kitchen, but again, Izzy insists he doesn't know Benji's father. He leaves shortly afterward. Benji goes up to his now empty apartment where his mother's final birthday gift awaits him. He deliberately counts the minutes to resist the urge to open it immediately. Then he carefully unwraps a brand new bicycle. Without wasting a moment, he takes it for a ride. His destination? The kitchen, hoping to find Izzy, but no one seems to know where the man lives. While riding through one of the kitchen streets, a group of local gang members stops Benji. They take an interest in his shiny new bike. Desperate to protect it, Benji defends it with such intensity that Staples, the leader of a self-defense activist group, intervenes. He allows Benji to keep the bike and invites him to join their group. They lead him to an apartment filled with friendly, welcoming young people. Benji is offered food and a place to sleep for the night. The next morning in the kitchen begins as usual, with Lord's voice echoing across the streets. Izzy prepares for another day of work. Meanwhile, Benji's new friends take him to a lookout where a large slingshot is set up. The group uses it to shoot down police drones patrolling the neighborhood. After several missed attempts from others, they hand Benji a shot. To everyone's surprise, he hits a drone on his first try, earning cheers from the crowd. Later, Izzy stops by a cafe and spots Benji with a group of sketchy-looking guys. He calls out to him, but the boy responds coldly, accusing Izzy of not caring about him. Suddenly, residents of the complex start banging on their metal cookware, the signal for a police raid. People scramble to their rooms. Izzy manages to pull Benji into his apartment, locking the door as police round up anyone left outside. While waiting for the raid to end, Izzy tries to convince Benji that he shouldn't associate with people like Staples' gang, but Benji has nowhere else to go. He pleads to stay for just 2 more nights. Reluctantly, Izzy agrees, offering only a bag and towel as bedding. Later, Lord broadcasts his usual post-raid message, urging people not to lose hope. Though most of London's residential complexes have been cleared, rebuilt, and sold, the kitchen remains the last refuge for the impoverished. Lord calls for unity against the government. Izzy prepares for work, and when Benji asks to visit his mother's sapling, Izzy unexpectedly invites the boy along to help. Benji rehearses a line about feeling comforted by his mother becoming a sapling, as it lets him sense her presence in the world. Later, he shares this with a grieving family who just lost their mother. Benji stumbles, eventually speaking from the heart about how much he misses his mom, moving Izzy in the process. When the workday ends, they return to the kitchen together. On the way, the boy tries to ask what will happen to the tree growing from his mother, but Izzy urges him to forget about it and just have fun. To that end, he takes him to a party. Benji watches the young people skating around on glowing rollerblades, and Izzy quickly brings him a pair, encouraging him to give it a try. The boy eagerly joins in the fun, while Izzy watches from a distance. At that moment, his colleague Jace spots him and expresses surprise at seeing him there, as Izzy usually avoids socializing with the neighbors. The 2 men move toward the bar, with Benji trailing behind. He soon finds himself among Staples' group, who warmly welcome him. Benji notices a pretty girl named Ruby and decides to stay with the group. Meanwhile, Izzy's friend asks who the woman they buried was to him, but Izzy cuts off the conversation and orders a drink. Benji, on the other hand, gets acquainted with Ruby and eventually joins the dancing crowd, thoroughly enjoying himself. A new morning begins with Lord's voice greeting the residents of the kitchen. Benji, who spent the night at Staples' apartment, is woken by one of the guys who has made pancakes for everyone, though he added cardamom, which not everyone appreciates. He thanks Staples for the bed, and Staples suggests Benji join their group, explaining they stand against the government and defend this land, which they consider their own. Staples hands Benji a bike. Delighted, Benji rides out with Staples' group. The young people race through the streets, showing off their skills, much to Benji's delight. Meanwhile, Izzy, who also spent the night at a colleague's place, is woken by Jace's young daughter, of whose existence he was unaware, having never taken an interest in Jace's personal life. Later, Izzy finds Benji chatting with Ruby and forces the boy to return the bike to Staples, sparking Benji's outrage. Izzy explains that kids like him are useful to Staples for shifting blame. If they commit a crime, like killing a federal officer, they'll be abandoned. Hearing the word abandoned, Benji accuses Izzy of doing the same to him. Izzy then shares his own childhood story, explaining he never knew his mother. Benji must learn to take responsibility for himself. Later, they return to Izzy's apartment, where a cot awaits Benji. The boy immediately begins decorating his new space, and they later visit a barbershop, though Benji decides to keep his dreadlocks. Benji finds an old lamp with a doll, which makes Izzy laugh. In the evening, they go for a walk together. And the next morning, Benji teaches his friend the proper way to brush his teeth. Later, Izzy goes to work, receiving a message that his new apartment will be ready tomorrow. Unexpectedly, he asks to see a 2-bedroom unit. The AI asks if he wants to cancel his previous order, but Izzy hesitates to respond. That day, Benji visits his mother's sapling and tells her that he's staying with Izzy, who is taking care of him. He then begs Izzy to help bring the sapling home. Izzy angrily shouts that it's just a tree. That night before bed, Benji asks about Izzy's new apartment and begs to come with him. He admits he can't pay rent, but can cook and clean. Izzy interrupts him. Benji then claims his mother told him Izzy is his father. Even if he didn't love her, he would have loved him. Izzy remains silent. The next day, they head to a cafe. Izzy acts strangely, refusing food, and then says he has an errand to run, asking Benji to wait for him there. Izzy leaves. The boy waits all day, returning to Izzy's apartment late at night to find his things gone. Izzy arrives at his new apartment where the panoramic window offers a view of the city's perpetual festivities. A new day begins. Suddenly, the sound of banging pots fills the air as people outside rush for cover. Ruby fails to reach her door in time and Benji lets her into the apartment. They manage to lock the door as police attempt to break in. Outside, shouts and sounds of violence fill the air. Then it becomes clear the residents' radio broadcast is no more. That night, people light torches and hold them out their windows to show that the kitchen remains unbowed. Izzy struggles to sleep, lost in thoughts as he stares at the cityscape through his window. The next morning, Lord's voice no longer echoes over the complex. Benji watches his neighbors pack up and leave, searching for new places to live. Izzy prepares for work. At the chapel, he learns of Lord's death. The room is filled with mourning for the man who had been a beacon of hope for so many years. Meanwhile, Staples gathers his group, including Benji, and declares, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is war." The gang rides out on bikes, smashing store windows and looting apartments. Benji witnesses the fear in people's eyes and refuses to partake in the violence, eventually fleeing. Izzy finds him back at his mother's apartment. Benji yells at him, asking why he even came. Izzy doesn't leave but sits beside him. He then pulls out a pot with a sapling and hands it to the boy. Later, they ride to the kitchen, replanting the sapling in a larger pot as the sound of banging pots warns of approaching police. Izzy and Benji run, barely making it back to the apartment. This time, the police are relentless. Trapped in a narrow passage, they fall into a trap set by Staples' people. From above, residents throw everything they can down at the officers. At that moment, Benji directly asks if Izzy is his father. Izzy subtly nods before asking if Benji wants him to be his dad. Benji suggests they see how it goes. Izzy hugs Benji and keeps him from turning toward the door as the police hammer on it. The police burst into Izzy's apartment. The screen fades to black, leaving their fate uncertain. As with all dystopias, this film reflects present-day issues. It addresses class disparity and gentrification, but somehow fails to fully explore its potential. Beyond the relationship between the man and the boy, the audience learns little else.